Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. To be continued. Mark stood on the wet sidewalk, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The rain had started falling harder now, soaking through his coat, but it felt like the chill from the meeting had seeped deeper into his bones. Eleanor's offer echoed in his mind, her words playing on repeat. Marry me. Not for love, but for business. It didn't seem real, but the weight of his debts, the mounting pressure from his family, made the offer seem like his only way out. He looked up at the dimly lit street lamp, watching the raindrops bounce off the pavement. Was he really considering it? Could he marry a stranger just to escape his life of endless struggle? Was his pride worth the price of security? He walked home in a daze, the wet pavement reflecting the dim light from the street signs. The city felt colder now, less welcoming, like he was walking through someone else's life. That night, Mark lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to shake the thought of Eleanor's proposal. He had always lived his life with a sense of duty to his family, to his education, to the expectations placed on him. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. His father's debts were too large, his future too uncertain. Could he really marry someone like Eleanor Brooks, a woman he barely knew? He turned over, his thoughts racing. He didn't have an answer, not yet. But one thing was clear: had to make a decision soon. The next day, Mark met Eleanor again. This time, they were at her office, a tall, imposing building with sleek glass windows that looked out over the city. Eleanor was sitting behind a large, polished desk, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture impeccable. She looked every bit the businesswoman she was: strong, confident, and controlled. Mark couldn't help but feel small in comparison, even though he knew the deal she was offering could change his life. Mark nodded slowly, taking a seat across from her. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge of the desk. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. What would his life be like if he accepted? Would he be giving up his dignity, his freedom? Or would he be gaining control of a future he never thought possible? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Mark was silent, taking in her words. She spoke with such conviction, such certainty. It was hard to argue with her logic. But something inside him, something deeper than the practical concerns, felt a twinge of resistance. Could he really marry a woman who saw this as nothing more than a business transaction? And yet, his eyes drifted to the desk, where he could see the numbers on his father's unpaid bills, the stacks of overdue notices that had been piling up for months. His family's financial situation was a ticking time bomb, and the pressure was unbearable. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low and hesitant. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can marry you for a contract. It feels wrong. But my life right now, it feels like it's falling apart. I can't see another way out. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes softening for the first time. I understand. This isn't easy, Mark. But you have to decide what matters to you. Your pride? Or your future? I'm offering you a chance to take control, to step out of your father's shadow. This is your opportunity to build a life that's truly yours. Mark swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had always been the good son, the responsible one, the one who took care of everything. But the truth was, he was exhausted. Exhausted from the constant pressure, from the weight of expectations that weren't even his own. This could be his chance to break free. He just didn't know if he was ready to sacrifice everything for it. Eleanor nodded, her expression serious. Of course. Once the contract is fulfilled, you're free to go. I won't hold you to anything more than what we agree to. But for now, we have a lot to work out. Mark stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The decision had been made, but a small part of him couldn't help but wonder if he was making a huge mistake. Could this contract ever lead to something more? Or would he always be trapped in a life built on a lie? As he left the office, Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Your future is in your hands now, Mark. Make it count. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was taking control. To be continued. Mark stood at the foot of the grand staircase in Eleanor's mansion, his hand gripping the railing as he stared up at the vast expanse of marble and polished wood. This was his new life, his contract life. The decision to marry Eleanor Brooks was already starting to feel like a dream, one he wasn't sure he was ready to wake up from. The mansion was stunning, every inch of it designed with the kind of elegance that only a woman with the wealth and power Eleanor possessed could afford. But no matter how magnificent the surroundings were, no matter how beautiful the mansion was, there was a hollow feeling deep inside him, one that told him he wasn't where he truly belonged. Eleanor's lawyer had already sent over the legal documents for the wedding, everything carefully outlined. The ceremony would be small, simple, just as they'd discussed. No grand celebrations. No guests. Just a formality. A business deal. Yet as Mark read through the papers, the reality of what he was about to do sank in deeper. He was about to marry a woman he hardly knew for the sake of a contract. He was about to trade the future he'd hoped for a chance at survival. The thought gnawed at him, but what other choice did he have? His debts weren't going to disappear, and neither were his family's expectations. He looked up, taking in the quiet elegance of Eleanor's home, her life. Was this really what he wanted? Was it enough to just survive? He had always believed in building a future for himself, but now, here he was, tying his future to a woman he didn't love. He had to remind himself that it was only temporary. Once the terms of the contract were fulfilled, he would be free. At least, that was what she'd promised. But as the days passed, Mark began to feel the pressure building. Eleanor was everywhere. Her presence was all-consuming. They ate dinner together each night, discussing everything from business to trivial matters, and Mark found himself playing the role of the obedient husband. The more time they spent together, the more he noticed the way she looked at him, as if she were waiting for something, and yet, he couldn't help but wonder if he was waiting for something, too. But what could that something be? Love? He knew that wasn't possible. This was a marriage born from necessity, not affection. And still, as the days turned into weeks, Mark found himself questioning his decision more and more. Was it possible for him to feel something real in this arrangement, or was he just fooling himself? He had no answers, only questions, and a sense of unease that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Eleanor, for her part, was just as composed and distant as she had been when they first met. She never showed any signs of weakness, never faltered in her professionalism. She was a woman of business, and this was just another deal to her. But beneath that icy exterior, Mark began to sense something else, a longing, perhaps, or even regret. He wasn't sure what it was, but the more time they spent together, the more he felt that there was more to Eleanor than just her cold, calculating business persona. One evening, after dinner, Eleanor asked him to join her in her study. Mark followed her into the room, where she was already sitting behind her large desk, staring at the documents spread out in front of her. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke. "Mark, I need to know if you're in this for the long haul. I know this is not the life you imagined for yourself, but it's the life you've chosen now. If we're going to make this work, we need to trust each other. We need to be partners." Mark nodded, but he wasn't sure what kind of partnership she meant. Was it a real partnership? Or was it just a business arrangement, as it had always been? "I am," he said finally, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. "I'll be your partner." Eleanor looked at him for a moment, as if searching for something in his eyes. Then, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. That's what I needed to hear." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Was it possible that Eleanor was starting to see him as something more than just a tool for her legacy? Or was it all part of the act, part of the contract they'd signed? He didn't know, and for the first time since agreeing to this marriage, he felt truly uncertain about everything. What did the future hold for him? Was this the life he was destined to live, or was there still a chance for something more? To be continued. Mark had no idea what he was expecting when he agreed to this arrangement, but as the weeks went by, the reality of the situation began to set in. Every morning, he would wake up to the silence of Eleanor's mansion, the emptiness of his new life weighing on him. He had his own wing of the house, a lavish room that seemed more like a hotel suite than a place someone could call home. The solitude was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he had everything he needed: space, comfort, luxury, but on the other, he had nothing that truly mattered. The connection he once longed for, the warmth of true companionship, seemed so distant now. It was just business. Everything was just business. And Eleanor? She was just as distant as ever, hiding behind her professionalism, behind the cold, calculating exterior she wore so effortlessly. Yet there were moments, fleeting and subtle, when Mark thought he saw something else. Something beneath the surface. He wasn't sure if it was loneliness, regret, or something deeper, but he couldn't ignore it. It was in the way she looked at him when they had dinner together, or when she'd ask how his day went. There was something there, something that hinted at a deeper connection between them, but it was always quickly hidden behind a mask of composure. One evening, after dinner, Mark was sitting in the living room, staring out at the city lights. He had been feeling more restless than usual, a nagging feeling in his chest that he couldn't shake. The house felt empty, despite being so large and so full of things. He was about to go upstairs to his room when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft light of the hallway. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice unusually soft. Mark blinked, surprised by the concern in her tone. For a moment, he just stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Was she really concerned? Or was this just another part of the act? "I'm fine," he said, his voice a little too tight. Eleanor stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "You don't look fine," she said, her eyes searching his face. "I know this arrangement is hard. It's hard for both of us. But I need you to understand something, Mark." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. "I didn't ask you to do this because I wanted to control you. I asked because I needed someone I could trust. Someone who could help me. And I need you to trust me too." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. Was this real? Was she actually opening up to him? He wasn't sure what to think. "I'm just trying to make it work," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't know how long I can keep doing this." Eleanor's expression softened. "You don't have to do this forever. I know this isn't what you imagined for your life. But maybe, just maybe, it's the life you need right now." Mark met her gaze, searching for the truth in her eyes. Was there more to this arrangement than he realized? Was there something between them, something that could grow into something real? For a moment, they just stood there, in the quiet of the room, neither of them speaking. Then, Eleanor took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice steady. "I can't promise you that this will be easy. But I can promise you that I'll be honest with you. And I hope you'll be the same with me." Mark felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time since he'd agreed to this arrangement, he felt like Eleanor wasn't just a business partner, she was a person, a woman who had her own struggles, her own fears. Maybe they weren't so different after all. He nodded slowly, trying to put his thoughts into words. "I'll try," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I'll try to trust you." Eleanor smiled faintly, a soft, almost unrecognizable smile. It was the first time he had seen her smile without the usual sharpness, the usual distance. And for a brief moment, Mark felt something shift between them. Something that didn't feel like business. It felt like something more. But as quickly as it appeared, the moment passed. Eleanor's smile faded, and she took a step back, her expression once again a mask of composure. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said. But I need you to know something, Mark. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my legacy. For the future. Her voice was firm, and the walls were back up, just like that. Mark watched her leave the room, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Was it possible? Could this arrangement actually turn into something real? Could he find love in a contract, in a life built on necessity? The questions lingered in his mind, unanswered, as he stared out at the city lights once more, wondering what the future really held for him. To be continued. The days that followed seemed to blur together for Mark. It was a strange balance between the life he had always dreamed of and the life he never thought he would have to settle for. Every morning, he woke up to the quiet hum of Eleanor's mansion, the silence of his own thoughts. There was no escape from the reality of what he had agreed to. His mornings were filled with meetings, calls, and endless tasks, as he began to understand more about Eleanor's world. It was a world of power, control, and strict expectations, one that Mark was beginning to feel more and more alien to. But there was something about Eleanor's unyielding determination that sparked a small ember of respect in him. She was not just a businesswoman. She was someone who had built an empire, someone who carried the weight of years of decisions on her shoulders, and yet, despite it all, she still carried a certain vulnerability that Mark could see only in brief glimpses. It was the moments when she would glance at him, those rare moments when she would let down her guard ever so slightly, that made Mark wonder if there was more to her than just the cold exterior. Was there a part of her that truly cared? Or was she simply playing the part, doing what needed to be done? One evening, after another long day of pretending, Mark found himself in Eleanor's study once more. The room was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. He had been expecting to review some financial documents, but instead, Eleanor had asked him to sit with her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but with an edge that Mark had come to recognize. He sat down across from her, his heart thudding in his chest. For a brief moment, he wondered if this was the conversation where everything would come crashing down: the deal, the marriage, everything. "About what?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "About us," she said, her eyes locking with his. "About what this really is. I need to know if you're truly in this, Mark. I need to know if you're committed to the life I've offered." Mark hesitated. He had never been good at lying, especially to her. He had tried to keep up the act, to convince himself that he could go through with it, but lately, the weight of the arrangement had begun to feel unbearable. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that this is real." Eleanor's eyes softened for a moment, and Mark thought he saw something flicker there, perhaps a trace of understanding. "You don't have to pretend," she said softly. "But this is the life we've chosen. And sometimes, we have to accept the choices we make, even if they don't feel right." She paused, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've made my choices, Mark. I've done things that I'm not proud of, but everything I've done for a reason. I've done it to build something, to leave a legacy. And that legacy includes you now, whether you like it or not." Mark swallowed hard. The words stung, but there was a truth in them that he couldn't deny. Eleanor was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her empire, and now, she was asking him to sacrifice too. To be a part of something bigger than himself. To play a role in her legacy. He looked at her, the woman who had offered him everything: wealth, security, a future, and yet, he still wasn't sure if he could accept it. "What if I can't do it?" he asked quietly. "What if I'm not the man you think I am?" Eleanor's gaze softened, and for a moment, Mark saw the weight she carried. "Then you leave," she said simply. "But know this: whatever choice you make, I won't hold it against you. This is your life too, Mark. You have the right to choose your own path." Mark sat in silence, the enormity of her words sinking in. He had been given an ultimatum: stay and live the life she had chosen for him, or walk away and risk losing everything. He had always prided himself on his independence, on being the one to make his own choices. But now, here he was, faced with a decision that would shape the rest of his life. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and thick. He felt the pull between his past and his future, between his own desires and the promises he had made. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he looked up at her, his decision clear in his mind. "I'm in this," he said, his voice firm, though his heart still ached with doubt. "I'm committed to the legacy. To this life." Eleanor didn't say anything at first. She just studied him, as if trying to read the truth behind his words. Then, finally, she nodded. "Good," she said quietly. "Then let's make it work. Together." Mark felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, though he wasn't sure if it was the right decision. As Eleanor stood and walked to the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real test had just begun. Would he be able to truly live this life, to become part of her world, or would he eventually find a way to break free? Only time would tell. To be continued. The days after Mark's decision were both oddly comforting and unsettling. Eleanor seemed to be more present in his life, guiding him through the business side of her empire, showing him the ropes of her world. Despite the cold professionalism she exuded, there were moments when Mark thought he saw a flicker of something else in her, something more human, more vulnerable. But those moments were fleeting, and for the most part, Eleanor maintained the same distance she always had. Their marriage, still technically a business contract, had settled into a strange rhythm. Every day felt like a performance. They would attend meetings, host events, make public appearances, always with the same scripted smiles, the same pretenses. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, partners in business and life. But behind closed doors, there was still an undeniable wall between them. Mark couldn't help but wonder if he was fooling himself, if there was any chance for something more than this. He had committed to this life, to Eleanor's legacy, but at what cost? One evening, after a particularly draining event, Mark found himself alone in their grand living room, staring out at the city below. The lights of the skyscrapers twinkled in the distance, but to Mark, they felt distant and cold, much like everything in his life now. He had done what he promised, he had committed to this life, to this arrangement, but he couldn't help but feel like he was losing himself in the process. He had given up his dreams, his future, for a life that wasn't truly his. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard the soft click of the door behind him. He turned to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft, yet tinged with a hint of concern. Mark shrugged, not sure what to say. "I'm just thinking," he replied, his voice low. Eleanor stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on him. "About what?" she asked. Mark hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "About everything," he said. "About this life. About us." He paused, unsure how to continue. "I'm trying, Eleanor. I really am. But sometimes, it feels like I'm losing myself in all of this. I thought I could handle it, but I don't know anymore." Eleanor stood still, her eyes searching his face. Mark could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she was torn between the responsibility she had for her legacy and the person standing before her. For a brief moment, he thought she might say something comforting, but instead, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I understand," she said quietly. "I never expected you to have it all figured out, Mark. This was never meant to be easy." She paused, her gaze softening. "But we're in this together now. And sometimes, we don't get to choose the path. We just have to walk it, no matter how difficult it is." Mark's heart ached as he heard her words. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but the weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. There was truth in what she said, but it also felt like a finality. Like there was no going back from this point. "I don't know if I can keep going like this," Mark admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be a part of your world, I do. But I'm not sure I can lose myself in it completely." Eleanor's expression softened even further, and she stepped closer to him. "You don't have to lose yourself," she said, her voice gentle now. "But you need to understand something, Mark. This isn't just about us. It's about everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed. I need someone I can rely on, someone who can help me keep this all together. And that someone is you. Mark swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a marriage. It wasn't just a contract. It was a partnership in every sense of the word. And he was right in the middle of it, whether he was ready or not. I know it's a lot to ask, Eleanor continued, but I need you, more than you realize. Mark felt his chest tighten, a sense of both responsibility and fear washing over him. This wasn't just about him anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that demanded more from him than he had ever anticipated. For the first time since he had agreed to this arrangement, he realized just how deep he was in. He couldn't walk away. He had already committed, and now, there was no turning back. He had to find a way to make it work. I'll try, Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll try to be the person you need. Eleanor's face softened, and for a moment, Mark saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before: gratitude. She nodded, her gaze never leaving his. That's all I can ask for, she said quietly. Mark knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And the path ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose, like he was part of something important. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Together with Eleanor. To be continued. The following weeks were a blur for Mark. He had made his decision, and now, every day felt like another step deeper into a world that wasn't his own. Eleanor's world. The mansion had become his reality, the constant events, meetings, and obligations, all part of a life he had never imagined for himself. But as time passed, something unexpected happened. He started to feel a sense of purpose, a role to play in the grand scheme of things. Eleanor was still as distant and professional as ever, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he caught a glimpse of the woman beneath the business facade. It was during those moments that Mark began to question everything. Was it possible? Could he actually find something real in this marriage of convenience? Or was he simply fooling himself, thinking that there could be more than just duty and obligation? One evening, after another long and exhausting day, Mark found himself alone in their living room. The soft glow of the chandelier above cast a warm light over the room, but it did little to chase away the unease that had settled in his chest. He was sitting in his usual spot on the couch, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth, when Eleanor entered the room. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stood there, her presence commanding the room. Mark didn't look up at her, his mind too consumed by the weight of his thoughts. But after a moment, he heard her voice, soft but steady. "Mark, we need to talk." The words hung in the air, and Mark's heart skipped a beat. He knew this conversation was coming. It had been building up for weeks, ever since he had made the choice to commit to this life. He looked up at her, finding her gaze steady, but there was something different in it, a hint of vulnerability, perhaps. He could see the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the toll that this life had taken on her. "About what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Eleanor took a deep breath before sitting down across from him. "About us. About this marriage." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know this wasn't what either of us expected, but we're in this together now. And I need to know where we stand. I need to know if you're still willing to go through with this, for real." Mark felt his chest tighten. The weight of her words was heavy, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It had become something more. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, they were both invested in this, in each other, even if it wasn't in the way either of them had originally imagined. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm here, Eleanor. I'm still in this. But it's not easy. You know that, right?" Eleanor nodded, her expression softening. "I do. And I'm not asking for things to be easy. I'm asking for honesty. For trust. Mark looked down at his hands, the silence between them thick and heavy. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for," he admitted. "I don't know if I can fully trust you." There, he had said it. The truth that had been hanging between them for so long. Eleanor didn't look surprised, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "I understand," she said quietly. "Trust takes time. And I know I haven't given you much of a reason to trust me." She paused, her voice tinged with regret. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't just for my legacy. It's not just about building an empire or maintaining control. It's about finding someone who can stand by me, someone who can help me when I need it most." Mark looked up at her, his heart beating faster. There it was again, the vulnerability that he had started to notice. The wall that Eleanor had built around herself seemed to crack, just for a moment. And in that moment, Mark felt a connection to her, a pull he hadn't expected. "I'm trying," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. "I really am. But I'm not sure how much more of this I can take." The pressure, the constant pretending, he trailed off, unable to finish his thought. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady but filled with a quiet sincerity. "I'm not asking for perfection, Mark. I'm asking for effort. I'm asking for us to try, even when it's hard. That's all I need." The silence stretched between them again, but this time, it wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with understanding, with the recognition of the weight they both carried. Mark let out a long sigh, the burden on his shoulders suddenly feeling a little lighter. "I'll try," he said finally. "I'll try to be the partner you need. But it's going to take time." Eleanor nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That's all I ask for." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt like they were on the same page, like they could finally move forward. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, they could build something real out of this arrangement after all. To be continued. The following weeks felt like a turning point for Mark. Though their marriage was still a business arrangement, something was changing between him and Eleanor. It wasn't love, not yet, but there was a connection forming, a quiet understanding that neither of them had expected. They started spending more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to truly get to know each other. They would have long conversations after dinner, speaking about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes. Mark found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He had never been good at sharing his feelings, but Eleanor made him feel heard, something he never thought possible in a marriage built on a contract. For her part, Eleanor seemed to be less guarded. She still carried the weight of her empire on her shoulders, but when they were together, she allowed herself to relax, even just a little. It was a strange and unexpected feeling, this fragile trust that was growing between them, but with every passing day, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. Was this just a temporary comfort, or was it something deeper? Was Eleanor truly opening her heart to him, or was she simply using him to maintain her legacy? One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Mark found himself once again alone in the living room. He sat by the fire, watching the flames dance on the hearth. The soft glow of the fire illuminated the room, casting long shadows on the walls. His mind wandered, and once again, the doubts crept in. He had made a choice to stay in this arrangement, to commit to Eleanor's legacy. But was he truly happy? Or was he simply telling himself he could be? Eleanor entered the room, breaking his train of thought. She looked different tonight, softer, more vulnerable. There was a certain exhaustion in her eyes that Mark hadn't noticed before. She stood by the door, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Mark, can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Mark turned to face her, his heart racing slightly. He had a sense of where this conversation was heading. She had asked him to talk so many times before, but tonight felt different. There was a seriousness in her tone that made him sit up straighter. "Of course," he said, setting his drink aside and standing up. Eleanor crossed the room slowly, her steps deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot about where we are," she began, her voice soft but steady. About this life we've built. It's not perfect. It's far from it, actually. But I want you to know that I don't take this lightly. I don't take you lightly. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. He looked at her, waiting for her to continue. I know this marriage wasn't what you expected, she said, her eyes meeting his. And I know it's not easy. But it's not just about the legacy, Mark. It's not just about the empire. It's about us, too. You're more than just a part of my business, more than just a name on a contract. You've become important to me. The words hung in the air between them, and Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Eleanor to say those words, to admit that he had become more than just her business partner. He had expected distance, not honesty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Eleanor shifted slightly, her gaze softening. I'm not asking for anything, Mark, she continued, her voice quieter now. I'm not asking for love. Not yet. But I need you to understand that this partnership, it's real. I'm here, and I want you to be here with me. Not just because of the business, not just because of the contract, but because of what we've started to build together. Mark stood there, his mind racing. He didn't know how to respond. He had been expecting a conversation about duty, about the business. But this? This was something different. Eleanor wasn't asking him to love her, but she was asking him to be present in this, to be a real partner in a way he hadn't expected. He took a deep breath, feeling a weight settle in his chest. I'm here, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm with you, Eleanor. I'm committed to this, to us. Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. Mark had never seen her smile like this before. It was softer, less guarded, and it made his heart swell in a way he couldn't explain. He had made the choice to stay, to fight for this partnership, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like it might be worth it. Maybe there was more to this than he had realized. Maybe there was more to Eleanor than he had ever given her credit for. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt like an unspoken understanding, like two people who had finally found common ground. Eleanor stepped closer to him, her presence warm and calming. Thank you, she whispered. Mark nodded, his heart beating a little faster. This wasn't the end of their journey, not by a long shot. But it was a beginning, a real beginning. Together. To be continued. As the days turned into weeks, Mark and Eleanor's relationship began to evolve into something neither of them had expected. They weren't in love, not yet, but they had built a foundation of mutual respect, a growing trust that neither had anticipated when they first made their agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They were a team now, navigating the challenges of their unusual marriage together. Mark found himself becoming more involved in Eleanor's world, not just as her business partner, but as someone who had a say in the decisions that affected their future. He wasn't just a name on a contract anymore, he had a purpose, a role that mattered. And as he grew more comfortable in this new life, something inside him began to change. He was no longer the desperate young man trying to survive. He was a man who had found a place, a purpose, and maybe, just maybe, a future. Eleanor, too, had changed. She was no longer the cold, calculating businesswoman who saw people as tools to build her empire. She had started to open up to Mark in ways he hadn't expected. There were still walls between them, but they were starting to break down. It was in the quiet moments, the late-night conversations, the times they would sit together in silence, that Mark realized something. He wasn't just here for the legacy anymore. He was here for Eleanor. For the woman behind the empire. For the person he had started to see beyond the mask of business. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the soft hum of the city in the distance, Mark looked at Eleanor. She was different tonight, her usual sternness softened by the peace that seemed to have settled between them. The weight of her legacy was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like something they could carry together. Eleanor, Mark said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, I know we've come a long way since we first started this. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression calm but with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. What are you thinking? She asked, her voice soft. I'm thinking that I'm grateful, he said quietly. Grateful for you. For the chance to be here, to be a part of something bigger than myself. But most of all, I'm grateful for the chance to be with you. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, a small, surprised smile tugging at the corners of her lips. For a moment, Mark thought he saw a flash of vulnerability in her eyes, a momentary crack in her usual composure. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the confident, composed woman he had come to know. You've been a part of this legacy from the start, Mark, she said, her voice low. But you're more than that now. You've become my partner in every sense of the word. Mark felt his chest tighten at her word. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. It wasn't just about the business. They had built something together, something real. I don't know what the future holds, he said, his voice quiet but firm, but I know that I want to face it with you. Eleanor smiled then, a genuine smile, the kind Mark had been waiting for. I think I'd like that too, she replied softly. And in that moment, Mark realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe before. This wasn't just a contract. It wasn't just a partnership born out of necessity. It was a real, authentic connection. And though their journey was far from over, Mark felt something inside him shift, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope for what the future could be. As they sat together, hand in hand, in the quiet of the garden, Mark knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough.